Three Religious Rebels, Part 2, Chapter 4, Alberic. The name of this chapter is Don't Shear Too Close. When the news of Robert's recall in 1099 spread about the monastic world, many a head shook knowingly, and many a monk spoke prophetically of the early death of the new monastery so auspiciously begun in the swampland. Few would have lamented its passing. The attempt was altogether too ambitious. Some scattered monks may have admired the daring that dreamed of transplanting men of the 12th century back into the 6th, more pitied the delusion that led sincere men into such an extravaganza. But most had only contempt and condemnation for such fanaticism. So, the rejoicing was rather general when Robert returned to Malem. But 1100 was not 2 months old before it was evident to all that Citeaux would not die, that she would not even grow sick. They saw that Alberic had injected new life into the little group in the swampland, and that the rebellion against the common way of living was making swifter, surer headway. The white habits gleamed in those woods as brilliantly as fireflies in the black of night, and they told the world just as insistently of life. One morning, however, Stephen found his usually smiling abbot looking glum. When he asked what was wrong, he got the surprising reply, "Oh, just having a dried apple day." When he asked what kind of a day that was, he got an explanation that set them both smiling. Alberic asked Stephen if Stephen had ever put a small dried apple into his mouth and kept it there. The prior hadn't. "Well," explained the abbot, "the longer you leave it there, the bigger it grows. It soaks up saliva and swells. If you leave it there too long, you'll choke." Stephen asked the point of application, and Alberic replied, "Most of our troubles, my good prior, are nothing but little dried apples, but we keep them in our mouths until we almost choke. Today is a dried apple day for me, because I can't seem to get some of my tiny troubles from between my teeth." "What troubles?" "That's what exasperates me. They are not worthy of the name of troubles. It's just a little touchiness on my part, or perhaps curiosity. You see, reports of what the Cluniacs are saying seep through, and whether I'm hurt at being criticized or humbled at being stupid, I don't know. But I do know I'd love to be able to answer the question, why don't they let us alone?" After staring at the base of the distant wall for a moment, he continued, "I can't understand it. Here we are, a mere handful, hidden away in this swampy wood, and there is Cluny with the whole of the continent under her jurisdiction and the whole world under her sway. For in very truth, she almost is the church. And yet she becomes absorbed in what we are doing. Why should a colossus be disturbed by a mite? Stars don't shine when the sun comes up. What is she afraid of?" Alberic was both puzzled and peeved. Stephen chuckled. "Your dried apple is almost choking you, Reverend Father," he said. "Just what have they criticized lately?" "What haven't they? Our table, our bedding, our habits, our manual labor. Didn't you expect it? You have criticized their table, their bedding, their manual labor." "I? When? Never!" Stephen chuckled again. "Oh no, Reverend Father, you never criticize them at all, but somehow or other most people take your every move as a criticism. You see, they have the peculiar habit of arguing logically. They say the one rule demands the one observance. Therefore, if you are right, Cluny is wrong. But if Cluny is right, you are fanatical." "Then they do not know the rule," said Alberic, as he reached across his desk for a text. Holding the little book before him, he nodded to Stephen and said, "Father Prior, there is hardly a chapter in this book that the abbot may not temper if he thinks fit. St. Benedict did not mean to tyrannize, he meant to order. Now that one truth makes this whole matter appear ridiculous. For Cluny can be Cluny, and Malem, Malem, and Citeaux, Citeaux, while all three remain Benedictine. Let them interpret the rule as they see fit. That is none of my affair, but I would like to be allowed to interpret it as I see fit. Stephen only shook his head. No, Reverend Father, that is not the way the human mind works. It says that if we can survive on the 2 cooked portions that St. Benedict prescribed, then other Benedictines do not need 3 or 4. If we can thrive on the labor of our hands, then others do not need serfs. Ah, cried the abbot enthusiastically, that reminds me of a real problem. Never mind their mentality, and never mind the Cluniacs, but come and give me your full mind on this matter of labor and serfs. And Alberic energetically drew his chair up to the desk. It was such a characteristic change that Stephen smiled and approached the abbot's chair, but the smile soon vanished as Alberic proposed his plan. In 1101, the monasteries of France were being supported and some even enriched by revenues from ecclesiastical benefices, tithes, and the labor of serfs. Many an abbot was actually a feudal lord. His possessions were vast, his dependents many, his income great. This was a survival from the early centuries of the Middle Ages, when monasteries had been the germ cells of future cities and towns. Such sovereignty was good for the serf and good for the civilization, but it was not so good for the spirit of poverty. Monasteries became wealthy. At the time when Alberic bent to his planning with Stephen, there was not a monastery of any size on the continent that did not have its independent income. The monks did not have to work, for they were being supported by others. It is small wonder then that the monastic world gasped when it learned the outcome of Alberic's talk on his dried apple day. He had taken the text of the rule and pointed to the sentence, "They are truly monks when they live by the labor of their own hands." With that as a base, he started to build. Before he finished, he had planned his most radical and rebellious of all moves. He would not only reinstate poverty, he would ensure her lofty position. He had pointed out the dangers of wealth and showed how the very benefice of Odo, Duke of Burgundy, might work them harm. To blot out all shadow of compromise, he proposed that they maintain as much ground as could be cultivated by themselves and renounce every other source of income. Let us live the rule, Stephen. Let us be radical enough to be absolutely self-supporting. Let there be no semblance of compromise about Citeaux. It was but a logical step in his program, but it was a step that only a hero would dare to take. Alberic took it. Stephen and the community followed, but their step amazed more than the monastic world. Most of the nobility and many of the serfs had been marveling at the austerity of Citeaux and the generosity of her monks. They had been moved by the chivalry of men who dared to be different enough to show gallantry to God. Of course, they heard the laughs and lampoons of the other monks, but simple men have a shrewdness that often enables them to hear the heart of the merely clever, despite the speech of his mouth. They may have joined in the laughs and enjoyed the cleverness of the lampoons, but they had admiration for the men in the swamp. When they heard of Alberic's determination to support himself, however, they shook their heads. Even the Duke, loyal, admiring, ever faithful Odo, did not unequivocally approve. In 1099, after the church had been dedicated, the Duke had obtained permission from Robert to build himself a modest mansion close to the monastery. He was passionately attached to the place. He never allowed any great feast to pass without bringing a number of his companions to his mansion and having all attend the entire office in the solemn mass. Citeaux completed the conversion St. Anselm began. On the eve of Ascension Thursday, 1101, Odo, his son Hugh, and a goodly number of nobles stabled their horses in the monastery yard, retired to the private mansion, and prepared to celebrate the feast with the monks. The Duke had been doing this for almost 2 full years now, but a far deeper seriousness marked his behavior as he made his preparation this particular evening. He went about the grounds slowly. He insisted on being alone. He lingered in such favorite spots as the little nook to the side of the church door. He had sat in the shade there with Robert often, but he lingered longest in the plot that had been selected as the cemetery. The gruff old warrior was like a lover revisiting the scene where he first found love. No explanation of his strange behavior was given, or even guessed at, until after Mass on the morrow. He and his company had risen with the monks near midnight. They had spent those black hours from then till dawn in the dim church, following the solemn chant of the office and joining the monks in their prayers of praise. The Duke then begged leave to serve a private Mass. The remaining hour before the sunrise song he spent before the Blessed Sacrament. After the early morning prayers, he took a turn in the garden, then returned to church for the solemn Mass. It was noon when he met Alberic. "It struck me this morning," he said, "that your men would make excellent robbers." There was much in common between the abbot and the Duke. Both were warriors. Both were outspoken. Both had keen humor. Alberic laughed and retorted, "Who could judge more excellent than your excellency? I have often heard it said that it takes a thief to catch a thief." "That is precisely why I put it forth as a certainty and not as an opinion," replied the Duke. "I know my old business, and all through the night I watched your monks. I saw that they know their business. Father Abbot, the concentration of those men on the one work before them was inspiring. Indeed, they would make grand robbers, for a robber knows how to concentrate." "I think they are robbers," put in Hugh, the Duke's eldest son, who showed more of his mother's features and fair complexion than he did those of his swarthy sire. When his father flashed a questioning glance at him, the young noble went on. "They've stolen you from your old life and even from your old home. No wonder Mother taunts you with the question, 'When are you going to take the cow?'" But this time they were all seated around the special table Alberic always set for the Duke and his escort. The rule required that the abbot dine with the guests, and that he have 1 or 2 of the brethren with him when the guests were not too numerous. Usually he left Stephen with the community, for the rule demanded that a senior be there for the sake of discipline. But today, for some unknown reason, Alberic asked the prior to eat with the Duke. It was a jovial group that seated itself, for there was much mutual liking between Odo's followers and the monks of Citeaux. After the Duke had sipped his wine, he struck the board and said, "That settles it. We've got to have a new vineyard. What would you say to accepting the favorite of mine about a league to the north of us, Father Abbot?" Alberic touched his lips with his napkin before he replied, "I would say it can't be done." The Duke's eyes opened wide. The abbot chuckled, looked at Stephen Harding, and said, "The truth is like murder. It always will out." Then, turning to the Duke, he said, "Excellency, did you ever know that wealth brings poverty?" The Duke frowned. "I could never make much of paradoxes, Father Abbot. The gospel teems with them. Loss and gain, lose and find, life and death. But paradoxes only puzzle me. I'm just a simple soldier." "Well, let me tell you a little story about Malem," said Alberic. And then he recounted what had happened to Robert and his reform after the Bishop of Troyes had gone home hungry. It was cleverly told, convincingly told, The abbot ended with, "So you see, wealth can bring poverty." "I was just thinking a good vineyard could bring good wine," said the Duke with a laugh. "I'm not planning to endow you with my duchy." "It seems as if you've given us half of it already," put in Stephen. "When I returned from the last grange you donated, I told the abbot we'd all have to have 10-league boots if we are to harvest the crop in that field. I thought I had walked halfway to Paris." "Let the serfs do your harvesting," grumbled the Duke. "I left enough of them on that grange to care for it. Your men are monks. Sing your office, tend your garden, and let the serfs take care of the distant granges." "Excellency," said Alberic, "my prior and I held a council of war a short while ago. We'll now continue it in your presence. For although you haven't got the cow your son teases you about, you have been a member of our council ever since the day you rode through the woods and became horrified at what we were building." The Duke laughed heartily. "You needed counsel then. Perhaps you need it now. What have you planned?" Alberic told him then of his determination to retain only as much farmland as his monks could cultivate, and only as much meadow, woodland, and vineyard as the monastery needed for its own support. The Duke listened attentively. As the abbot proceeded with his outline, Odo began to drum on the table nervously. When Alberic finished, he shook his head and said, "You're shearing too close, Father Abbot. You're going to cut the sheep." Alberic pointed to the rule itself and to his regime of no compromise. The Duke asked what he would do if the community suddenly enlarged. The abbot laughed and said, "Call on you!" That pleased the Duke, but he still pleaded for prudence. Alberic shook his head and said, "Some people would preach prudence to the crucifix." The Duke broke out into a rumbling, infectious laugh. "Tell me in all honesty, Father Abbot," he begged, "is your private motto, 'Though everyone else, not I'?" "It can't be," put in young Hugh. "Why not?" snapped his father. "Doesn't he differ from every other abbot in the land?" "He does. But the motto you want to give him fell from the lips of Peter just before he fell. Father Abbot is not going to fall." The Duke laughed, then said, "Look before you leap. I have a solution for you, Reverend Father. You see, I don't take back gifts. So to satisfy both yourself and your humble servant, you'll have to make all the serfs on the various granges members of the community. Then you can keep your rule, and I can keep my self-respect." It was meant as a pleasantry. At the moment, Alberic and all at table took it as such, but it turned out to be the seed of Alberic's most revolutionary move. That, however, came later. They sat long at dinner that day, discussing the abbot's plan. It had been a surprising announcement, and it had called forth much heated debate. But just as they arose from table, the Duke made an announcement that was even more startling. "This is my farewell to Citeaux." Everyone looked at him in surprise. "My wife and son have had many a laugh about my taking the cow. I can't do that. But I can take the cross. I can't be a Cistercian monk, but I can become a crusader. My fathers and friends, I go to the Orient soon. They tell me the new Christian kingdom set up there needs stout arms. I have two. I go to be gallant to God in a different way." As usual, after the meal, the Duke retired with the abbot to the latter's room. This day, however, he brought his son with him, and asked the abbot to include Stephen Harding. The four then entered into a study of the monastery and its lands. The Duke painstakingly pointed out all possible difficulties and their logical solutions. It seemed as if he was more concerned about the monastery than he was about his duchy. Hugh paid close attention, and though Alberic again insisted that he was retaining only what was needed, the Duke said, "I am just showing my son what may yet be needed. I mean to help, not to hinder your reform, Father Abbot, but I am off to war. Men die in battle, you know. I am looking ahead." Late that afternoon, as Alberic and the Duke paced the paths of the garden that was just taking shape, the abbot said, "So, you're off to the Holy Land. How I envy you, Excellency." When he saw the Duke turn sharply, he smiled and said, "I suppose that does sound like a strange confession to come from a monk. But let me tell you, Excellency, there has not been a time that I have swung into a saddle that my blood did not leap. I've had many a stiff battle with myself in the years that are gone, but thank God I always defeated myself. I've proved that blood can be beaten." The Duke chuckled. "I'm glad you told me that, Reverend Father. I've often wondered about you and others like you. I've wondered if the lust for battle died the moment you donned the cowl, or did you have to kill it every time you heard the jingle of spurs or saw a suit of mail? We remain men when we become monks, Excellency. And men of war, I see. But now here is a puzzle for you. You envy me my crusading in the Holy Land, and I envy you your crusading in the swampland. Can you tell me why it is that the grass always looks greener in your neighbor's meadow? I think it is a disease we caught when paradise was lost. You remember that Adam and Eve could have eaten of every fruit in the garden save one. That was the one their mouths watered for, and that was the one they ate. That is why I envy you and you envy me. And so it will go on until paradise is again regained." The Duke's eyes were on the pebbly path before him. He was meditating aloud when he said, "Father Abbot, all through the office of last night, all through the masses of the morning, the one thought that kept throbbing in my brain was, how fortunate are these monks to be locked up with God alone. That's a very exact description of your monastery here. You are really locked up with God. I was watching your monks during that long chant. It was evident that they had only one thought. It was God. It was clear that they have only one work, one life, one love. He is God. Yes, it is literally true. You men are locked up with God." Alberic caught much of the Duke's mood and something of his manner as he said, "That's a new concept, Excellency, and a true one. I have heard our life referred to as leisure to love God. And believe me, it is that. You have your family, your duchy, and 101 other concerns. Even the serfs have worry about work and wages. But the monk in the ranks has only one thing to do, love God." "It's a busy leisure, Father Abbot," chuckled the Duke. "From shortly after midnight till shortly after sundown it is a goodly stretch, yet your men have been occupied all day." Occupied with God. Their occupation is their leisure. "Oh, I see what you mean. It is well named. This life of freedom from concerns is a life of leisure, and you occupy that leisure in loving God. But I like your idea even better, Excellency. Since we are cloistered, we are truly locked up. Yet a monastery can be looked upon as a prison. We are all criminals. We were born such, and most of us added to our heritage. You did well to call us robbers. We have been thieving time." "How so?" "Well, we were given time to spend on the one work of life, and we have spent it on others." "One work?" "Certainly. We all have but one work to accomplish before we die. Life has been given us that we may make an act of love." "Well, I'm going to make my life an act of contrition. That's why I go to the Orient." Alberic stopped. He looked long at the Duke, who had halted a step before him. Finally he said, "Excellency, you have seen deeper than I. I have always said an act of love. But since the best of us is but a prodigal, that love should be burning, aye, blazing, penitent love. Your term expresses more truth. We are on earth to make an act of perfect contrition, and that will be our act of love. You make yours by going to the Orient. we make ours in this penitentiary where sinners have locked themselves up with God in order to become saints." They resumed their walk. When the Duke told the abbot that he would carry Citeaux in his heart with him to the Holy Land, Alberic said, "And Citeaux will accompany you every step of the way with her prayers." As they parted, Odo expressed some concern for the abbey, but Alberic laughed it away with, "Hugh is a son to his father. He shall never want for a friend both powerful and generous." Just as they were entering the house, the Duke turned to the abbot and asked, "Are you really going to shear as close as you have planned?" "Excellency," said Alberic, and his eyes held fire, "I am going to shear as close as the rule demands. Citeaux is an abbey where there will be no compromise."